What's up everyone, welcome to this video. So I thought I could make a follow-up video to one of the videos that I made that is popular on this YouTube channel. In this video we're going to look at how to build a REST API with PostgreSQL, SQLAlchemy and FastAPI. This is an update video to one video that I made 2 years ago, and I hope you enjoy and learn from this video. In this video we shall look at some of the modern features of Pydantic, FastAPI as well as SQLAlchemy 2.0. So without further ado, let us get into the video. So the first thing we shall have to do is to go ahead and create a virtual environment in which we're going to install our requirements. So we're going to install the requirements for our API. I'm on Windows and I'm using Git Bash for now, but feel free to use any terminal of your choice. So what I'll do is to start with Python -m venv env. So I'm going to call my virtual environment env, but feel free to call it whatever you may want. And this will go ahead and create the virtual environment within our project folder. Once the virtual environment has been created, we're going to activate it with source env scripts and activate. So the first thing we're going to do is to go ahead and install our dependencies. So I'm going to start with pip install FastAPI, and I'm also going to install uvicon, which is going to help us to run our web server. So when these have been installed, I'm going to go ahead and pip freeze this within a requirements.txt file. So I'll say pip freeze, and then I point to requirements.txt. So once I've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be for us to set up our simple web server with all the routes that we may need for this application. So to begin, I'm going to create a file which I'm going to call our main.py file. And within this main.py file, sorry, I actually called it main.pt, but let me rename it to main.py. In here, what you're going to do is to begin by first importing FastAPI and then creating an instance of our FastAPI class. So what I'll do is to say from FastAPI, we are going to go ahead and import the FastAPI class. And then we're going to begin by creating our app instance, which is going to be our instance of our FastAPI. Now this will be the main entry point of our entire FastAPI application. So using this FastAPI instance, we're going to go ahead and create methods as well as routes that we may need to access specific API endpoints. So let's begin with the one for basically accessing our GET. So we can actually create one by calling the app decorator. Then here you can specify the method, the HTTP method, which is going to be the GET method. Then we're going to specify the URL that we need to access. Now in this case, let's basically first give it a simple handler. So we can define this as, let's say, the hello route. And this will basically go ahead and return our simple message just for testing. So when you find this, we can go ahead and say hello world. So to run our simple server, what we're going to do is to basically come within our terminal. Since we've installed uvicon, we can now have access to the uvicon command. And in here, what we need to do is to go ahead and say uvicon. In this case, we shall go ahead and say uvicon, then the name of the main.py module, which is main. So shall say uvicon main. And then we shall also specify which app we want to run. Now in this case, it's going to be our FastAPI instance right here. So we shall say app. And once we've been able to provide that, we shall also provide another option, which is basically going to help us to reload our server every time we shall have code changes. So this will start our web server, and now we see that our app is running at localhost 8000. So I'm going to press Ctrl and click, and this will give us access to our API endpoint at localhost 8000, which is returning a simple message of hello world. Now that this is working, let's go ahead and set up other endpoints that are going to help us to create, read, update, and delete our simple database records. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to go right here, and I'm simply going to do the same thing, but I'm going to describe note items in this case. So we're going to go ahead and set up one for getting all notes. So this is going to be a get method that's going to be made to the /notes endpoint. And here we shall define the function that's going to handle that request. So in this case, we shall define it as the one for getting all notes. And right in here, we are simply going to pass this for now, but we shall implement the functionality later on as we go on. The next thing we're going to do is to copy this, and we are also going to paste it right here. So this is going to be the one for creating a single note. So how we're going to do that is by coming and specifying this as the post method, where we're actually going to go ahead and basically send data to our server. We shall also redefine this method or this specific function as the one for creating a note. So there are a lot of details that are going to go in here, but we are going to cover them later on in the video. The next thing we're going to do is to define one for retrieving an item by its ID. So I'm simply going to copy this very fast so that we save time. And then what I'll do is to basically go ahead and define this as the one for being a get method. So this will be the one to retrieve a note by its ID. So it will be on /note ID. And what we're going to do is to also provide this note ID within our specific crate. This is actually going to be for get note. So I'll basically just say this is for get note by, so I'll actually say get note by ID, which is going to be get note. So once we have that, then we can also do the same thing. So this will be for updating a note. So I'll say update note, and this will be a put request or a patch request. Let's make it a patch request to the /note. So this will be similar to the one for retrieving. And in here, what you're going to do is to have /the note ID. So once we've been able to do that, we shall also need to have our note ID provided within this specific method for updating a note by its ID. Now let's go ahead and also work on that for deleting. So here we're going to have something very similar to what we have here. So I'll copy this and then paste it. But the method is what we are actually going to change. We shall instead name this to be a delete method. So once we've been able to do that, we shall also rename this function to be the one for deleting a note. And once this is done, then we are actually going to go and verify if these changes are working. So if we go to our API, if we refresh, we now see that this is returning hello world. But in case we get rid of this route, which is returning our message of hello world, we are now going to be seeing a not found, which means that there is no route that exists at our root endpoint. What we want to do is to basically expose our SwaggerUi, which is inbuilt within FastAPI, to help us access the documentation of our project or our API on our homepage. So for us to do that, what I'll do is to go right in here, and I'll basically go where we have our FastAPI instance. So I'm going to provide a bunch of arguments that are going to help us to basically define some aspects of our SwaggerUi. The first thing I'm going to provide is going to be the title, and this is going to be the title of our SwaggerUi or our documentation. I'm just simply going to say this is going to be our noted API. Feel free to call it whatever you want. And what I'll do is to come right here and also provide a dummy description. So I'll just come right here and say I shall have a description, and this description is going to be this is a simple note taking service. So let's say a simple note taking service. So once we've been able to do this, then we shall also come right here and provide the URL on which we want this documentation to be shown. So I'll come right here and say docs URL, and this is going to be equal to the /URL or our root URL. So once we've been able to provide that, then when you go back to our root URL right here or our homepage, we shall see that our SwaggerUi is being rendered right here, which is amazing. So for now, we can be able to see all the routes that we've created using our FastAPI. Each time we define a route or an endpoint, we basically go ahead and automatically include it on our SwaggerUi, just like you see right here, which is beautiful. Now, for now, we have not yet set up a data source or a database. And what we're going to do is to set up SQLAlchemy with Postgres. So in this video, we're going to be using PostgreSQL as our database. We're also going to look at how we can use SQLAlchemy asynchronously with Async IO. So let's go ahead and start doing that. So what I'll do is to go right within our terminal. I'm going to stop our server for now. And after stopping this server, I'm actually going to stop the terminal. Seems like my terminal has a problem. Let me restart my editor. I restart my editor for now. Now we are going to see that it's going to restart. So when we restart our terminal, I'll basically go ahead and first reactivate the virtual environment with source env, so bscripts, and come here and say activate. So that will basically activate our virtual environment. So once this virtual environment has been reactivated, we can now go ahead and install SQLAlchemy as well as the DB API for PostgreSQL, which is Async PG. So what you're going to do is to come right here and say pip install, and this is going to be SQLAlchemy, and we want to install the SQLAlchemy Async IO extensions as well as Async PG, which is going to allow us to connect to our PostgreSQL database. So I'm going to press enter, and this will go ahead and install these requirements within our virtual environment. So once these have been installed, I'll still freeze them within our requirements.txt file. So I'll say pip freeze and then point to our requirements.txt. We shall add them to our requirements.txt file. And now the first thing we're going to do is to go ahead and create our data models, or actually connect to our database. So I'm going to be using PostgreSQL and pgadmin as our UI that's going to allow us to basically access our PostgreSQL database. So I'm going to pull up my pgadmin right here. So while it's loading, I'm going to go ahead and basically try to connect to our database using SQLAlchemy. So I'll come right here and I'll create a new file, and I'm going to call this our db.py. So within db.py, what I'm going to do is to go ahead and create an engine object. So think of an engine as the way in which we access the database. Without the engine, we cannot be able to connect to the database. We cannot be able to query for anything from the database. So using the engine, we define which database we're going to use and how we're going to connect to it and basically do whatever transaction you may want to create on the database. So with Async IO, we can still create an async engine using the create async engine function. Normally, when you're working with an ORM like SQLAlchemy, or when you're using SQLAlchemy, you'll need to just call the create engine function that comes from SQLAlchemy ORM. But for now, if we want to basically go ahead and just create the async engine, what we have to do is to make use of the Async IO extensions. So now my PostgreSQL is showing up. So my pgadmin is showing up right here. What I'm going to do is to provide my database and my password and say okay. So this will basically help me to access the pgadmin. So I'll go to servers and then PostgreSQL 15, and then I'll come right here and say databases. So right here we have some databases that are existing, which is good. So what I'll do is to first of all create a database, and I'll give this a name. So I may call it something like noted or noted DB, and then I'll go ahead and save. So keep in mind the user with which you created that database, or the owner of that database, as you're going to need them to connect to that database. So to start, what I'm going to do is to head over to my code right here, and I'm going to first create our engine. So to begin, I'm going to say from SQLAlchemy.ext.async IO. So I'm going to say .ext.async IO. I'm going to import the create. So this is going to be create async engine function. So once we've been able to create the call the async engine function, we're going to go ahead and create our engine object. So the engine object is going to be the call to the create async engine function. This is going to take in the URL that's going to specify the database that we're going to use. So what I'm going to do is to put this in an env file so that we cannot expose it to our public repository or our public Git repository. So I'll do is to come right here, I'll create a new file, and I'm going to call this file .env, and in here I'll define some environment variables. Now what I want to provide is going to be the database URL, which is going to basically describe how we're going to connect to our database. So I'm going to define this as a PostgreSQL URL, and this will be PostgreSQL. So this is going to be the database, and if we want to connect to another database, you may do something like, let's say, SQLite plus IOSQLite, then plus whatever. So in this case, what we're going to put here is going to be the DB API, which is going to be async PG. Then I'll put this colon and then the forward slashes. Then we need to provide the user, who is Postgres on my side. Please use your Postgres username. And then I'll also provide my password for that Postgres user. And then I'll say at localhost, which is going to be the host of that specific database. So if we go right here, the name of the database we've created is called the noted DB. So what I'll do is to come and provide that specific name right here, which is going to be the noted DB. So once I've been able to create this database URL and add this to our env file, I'm going to go ahead and basically load that so that I can use it this side. So to load this, I'm going to need python.env, which is going to help me to pass it from our specific env file into our code. So let me begin by installing python.env. So I'll say pip install python, and this case is going to be .env, and this will go ahead and collect python.env and add it within our requirements. So to begin, I'm going to first load .env. I'll just come right here and say from .env we shall import a function called load.env. What this function is going to help us do is to basically help us to load or pass the environment variables written within our env file. So in case we are to use them, then we have to come and call it and provide some arguments right here like the .env path. But as long as it's within the same folder, then we are safe to go. We should not provide anything, or we can just get away with not providing anything. So once we've been able to do that, we also need to import OS as it's the one who's going to help us to load and use those environment variables, just like you see how we're going to do it. So I'm going to do is to come and say os.getEnv, and in this case we shall provide our database URL. Now after doing this, I'll need to also provide echo, and I'll specify echo to be true because we need to log some SQL that's going to be performed on any transaction that we're going to need within our database. So once we've been able to do this, then the next thing for us to do is going to be for us to create a database model. So think of a database model as a programmatic way, or basically a way for us to describe our database tables without having to write SQL. All we need to do is to create a model class, and this model class will help us to create a model within our database. So to begin, I'm going to come right here and I'll begin by creating a new file, and this is going to be our models file. Now to create a model in SQLAlchemy, we have to extend a base class or inherit from a base class. And to create this base class, all we need to do is to basically also subclass the declarative base class that's provided by SQLAlchemy. So what I'm going to do is to come right here within our db.py, and I'm going to keep all the things for databases just right in here so that we can get to access them in different parts of our code. So I'm just going to come and basically import the declarative base function, which is actually going to be the declarative base class from SQLAlchemy ORM. So this is going to be the one to help us to create the base class, and then using that base class we shall create our database models. So what I'll say is from, and this is going to be from SQLAlchemy.orm. We shall go ahead and import. We shall import our declarative base. So shall basically go ahead and import our declarative base class. So once we've been able to import our declarative base class, simply going to come right here and say class, and this is going to be our base class. So shall basically call this our base. And this class is going to inherit from our declarative base. So once we've been able to do that, we shall just simply pass this for now, and that will be enough for us to basically go ahead and create the base class. So using this base class, we are going to go ahead and create our database model. So what I'll do is to come right here and say from db, which is our db.py module, we are going to go ahead and import our base class, and then using that we are simply going to create a simple class. So this is going to be our node class, which is going to inherit from our base class. Now I'm simply going to pass this for now. Now let me just create a simple comment right here, and this comment is going to help us to go ahead and describe the structure of our simple database tables. So I'm going to come right here, and all I have to do is to first create a class. I'm going to give it the name of node, and we shall have different attributes specified right here. So we shall begin with the ID. I'm going to provide this ID as a string, and then we can also have the, let's say each node will have a title, which shall be also a string. We can also have content or the detail for that specific node, which is going to be a string. And then we can also have something like, let's say, the date at which we created that specific node. So let's call it the date created. And this is going to be a date time object. So once we have this structure in mind, then it's going to be easy for us to go ahead and basically create this structure as a database model. So to do that, what we're going to do is to come right here and import some utilities that are going to easily help us to create our database model. So those are going to be the mapped class, which is basically the one that's going to help us to map each of these attributes onto a specific type. Just like we've been able to describe that an ID is going to be a string, SQLAlchemy uses type hints to help us do that, which we are going to actually look at. So let's begin by importing those utilities. So what I'm going to do is to come right here and say from SQLAlchemy.orm, we are going to simply import our mapped class as well as our mapped column. So we're going to look at how these are going to work. Now I'm going to come right here, and the first thing we provide when dealing with an SQLAlchemy model is the table name, or the Danda table name attribute, which is basically going to be the name of that specific table in the database. And in this case, shall call that table notes. And once we've been able to create that table, the next thing is going to be for us to define how these fields are going to be. So let's begin with our ID field. So we basically say that our ID is going to be a string. Now we're going to use our mapped class to basically map this onto the string type. And in case we want to add other attributes onto this string type or this ID, then we can use the mapped column function. And this takes in a series of attributes that we may need, including constraints. So let's say we wanted to basically go ahead and create this as our primary key. We can just come right in here and say primary key is going to be equal to true, meaning that this field is going to be our primary key. The next thing we're going to do is to basically go ahead and have our title. So our title will be a mapped, so this will be a mapped string, and using this string we're going to have mapped column, and this will be nullable equals to, let's say, false, since we do not want it to be null. Now also going to provide our content, and this is going to be mapped, so shall provide our mapped string. And in this case, let's say we want to make this a text column, then we'll have to first import the text type. So I'm going to go at the top right here, and I'll say from SQLAlchemy, we are going to go ahead and import our text, and it's actually going to be the text class, not the text function. So Once we have that, we can define this as our text function, actually our text class or our text type. And then we're also going to go ahead and say that this is not going to be null by saying nullable is going to be equal to false. So once this is done, then the next thing is going to be for us to describe what our date created is going to be. So what I'm going to say is date created is going to be a date time field. So shall say mapped, and then this will be mapped to date time. But since this is not this is something we have to actually go ahead and import from Python. So I'm going to go at the top and say that we are going to import the datetime type. So shall come and say from datetime, we are going to go ahead and import the datetime class. And once we've been able to do that, then we are simply going to come right here where we have our datetime mapping. Then we can also provide a default. So I'm going to come and say we're going to call the mapped column function and then say that our default is going to be the date time at which this specific node was created. So shall say datetime.utc now. And this will be just enough for us to create our database model. So let's go ahead and try to return a string representation of this specific database model. So each time we use these nodes, we cannot be able to return them in a way that we can easily understand. So therefore that creates a need for us to create some sort of string representation in which they will be returned and be readable by us. So what we're going to do right here is to basically create the function shall provide this repre function. And what this is going to do is to help us return these objects in a way that we can easily read. So to begin, I'm going to say return f. Sorry for this. So I'm going to close this. And once you're here, what we're going to do is to provide this as a note, and then we shall provide the title of this specific note. So we're going to say self.title, which is going to be the specific note, as well as the date at which you created. So we shall say at, and then say self.date created. And this is going to be how our notes will be returned. Alright, so we've been successful in creating our database model. The next thing we're going to do is to try to do some CRUD functionality using this note object. But before we actually do that, we are going to go ahead and create this table in our database, or write this table in our database. So for us to do that, what we're going to do is to head over to our code right here. I'm going to create a new module, which I'm going to create, which I'm actually going to call create db.py. Inside create db.py, what we're going to do is to basically go ahead and make our models turn into real database tables, which we actually have one model. So we're going to turn that one model into one database table in our database. So to begin, I'm going to first of all import the things that are required, which is going to be our base class. So we shall say from db, we're going to import our base class, and we're also going to import our engine. So once we've imported these two, the next thing is going to be for us to basically go ahead and use our engine to connect to our database, and then use it to also go ahead and basically create our database tables within our database. So we shall create our coroutine, and through that coroutine we shall get access to our connection, and then use that connection to create our database tables. So I'm going to first of all begin by importing Async IO, because that's what is going to help us to run the coroutine. And then after that, we shall define our coroutine with async def. So I'll say create, just come right here and say create db. And when I have this, then we are actually going to also go ahead and create a with statement, or a context manager, through which we're going to create our connection. So we're going to say with engine dot begin. So what this is going to help us to do is to establish a connection object, and through this connection object we shall be able to do things such as creating our database tables in our database. So we are simply going to call this as our con. Then what we need to do is to go ahead and basically call a bunch of methods on this connection object to help us to run and create our database tables. Before you do that, I'm going to first get access to our models. So I'll say from models import not, and then once I've been able to do that, I'm going to now go ahead and await. So since these are coroutines that we are calling, shall call connection dot run sync. So this is going to be a traditional synchronous function for creating our database tables or for dropping our database tables. So in this case, if you have any existing tables, we shall begin by first of all getting rid of them with drop all, and then we are now going to go ahead and call dot run sync. So this is basically run synchronous, and whatever it's running as synchronous is base.metadata dot create all. So in this case, we are going to come right here and say base.metadata dot, in this case we are also going to say create all. And once we've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be for us to basically go ahead and run this. But before we run this, we are going to dispose this connection. So the way we're going to do that is by basically awaiting. So shall just basically come and say engine dot dispose, and this will basically get rid of our connection after we have been able to create our tables. Now that this is done, we are going to run our coroutine, which is this function, and it will basically go ahead and create our database table that we've created from our simple model. So to begin, I'm going to say async io dot run, and here we are going to call our coroutine, which is going to be the one for create db, and this will be enough to create our database table right here. So I'm going to pull up our terminal and run Python. This is actually going to be create db.py. Now shall see that this is going to go ahead and create our database, just like you see. Even the SQL is being loaded, like you see right now. So I'm going to clear our terminal, and then we are going to confirm if the database table has been created. So I'll go to pgadmin right here, and then I'll try to basically refresh and then go to schemas. I'll head to the tables part, and within our table we have our notes where we have our columns, and now we see that the columns ID, title, content, and date created have been created within our simple database. Now this is interesting. So what we've basically done is to define our model right here. We've gone ahead and created our database table within our database table right here. Now the next thing we're going to do is to basically create a bunch of functions that are going to help us to create, read, update, and delete our model objects. So this is going to be interesting. So to begin, what I'm going to do is to create a simple file right here, which I'm going to call our crud.py file. And within this, we're going to create a class that's going to be responsible for holding all those functionalities into one class. And using this class, we shall basically create an instance of that class and then go ahead and basically try to access all these from one class. So I'll come right here, and the first thing I have to do is to import our not model. So I'll say from models, we are going to go ahead and import our not model. And once we've been able to import our not model, the next thing is going to be for us to basically make use of our not model. So we're going to create this class, which is going to be our CRUD class. And using this CRUD class, we're going to define all the methods that are specific to creating, reading, updating, and deleting. So I'm just going to come right here and say def. And in here, what we're going to do is to basically go ahead and define the methods. So the first one is going to be the one for basically helping us to get all our or retrieve all the notes from our database. So I'll define this. I'll say it's going to be an asynchronous method. So this was going to be get all. Let me actually just call it get all. So this is actually going to be called from self, and in here we are actually going to be making use of an async session maker instance. So for us to actually make use of Async Session Maker, we are going to import our Async Session Maker. So I'm going to explain what that does in a minute. So to access that, we shall go from SQL, we shall go to SQLAlchemy.ext.asyncIO, and then we are going to go ahead and import our Async Session Maker. So once we've done that, we shall also get to need the Async Session class. And once we've been able to access the Async Session class, then we're going to go ahead and basically make use of it in all the methods that we're going to define right here. So the session is the way through which we carry out transactions to our database. Once we have an engine, all we do is bind that engine onto our session, and we'll be able to carry out different things or queries to our database. So think of a session as just a medium through which all these things are done. And without the session, you cannot actually go ahead and do anything to the database. So it's the one that allows us to connect to the database so that we'll be able to carry out most of the functionality that we may need when using our database. So what this is going to take in is going to be an async session, and this is going to be of type async session maker, or it's going to actually be an instance of the async session maker class. Now, this is expected to return an object of type async session. So once we've defined our method, just like you see right here, we're going to create a context manager that's going to be responsible for helping us to create an instance of that session, or that async session. Now guys, future Jonathan here. So guys, this code is going to contain a lot of context managers with statements, and they kind of make the code lengthy, but they are very important. Do not forget to add them, otherwise your server is going to keep breaking down because of sessions not being closed. So that was just a small addition to this video. So for us to do that, we're going to say async. So sorry for this, so we shall say async, and in this case what we're going to do is to basically say with our async session which we've defined right here. So we shall say with our async session object, it's actually going to be our async session object as our session object. We shall go ahead and basically create a simple select statement, and what this simple select statement is going to do is to allow us to select or query for all the items that exist within our database, and those are our nodes. So what we're going to do here is going to be to create a statement, and this is going to actually be a select statement. Now SQLAlchemy provides for us the select function that allows us to be able to carry out real select statements, just like selecting all from a specific database table in real SQL. We can be able to also use the select function to do exactly that. So what we're going to do is to come at the top. I'll begin by accessing that SQLAlchemy function. So I'll say from SQLAlchemy, I'm going to go ahead and import what is called the select function. And once we have access to the select function, I'm going to come right here, and then I'm going to basically add select. Here we shall basically show selects, and we are going to provide our note model in here so that we basically create something like select star from note. And what we're going to do is to come and say from models, we are going to go ahead and import our note model. Once we've imported our note model, so we shall select from our note model, and then we shall basically go ahead and order all those items by, so in this case we can order by let's go ahead and order this by the note ID. So and just come right here and say we're going to order this by the note ID. And once we've been able to create a statement, now we need to execute that statement for us to get the results. So for us to execute that, we are going to simply create a result, and this is going to be equal to where we use our session. So shall await session dot execute, and this will be executing our statement right here. So once we've been able to do that, then we are now going to return our result. So we are going to come right here and say return result.scalars, just to help us return this as a list of the items. So this will be enough for us to get access to all our node items. Now we're going to go ahead and define how we create a single node. So what you're going to do is to come right here. So I'm just simply going to come and I define a method, and this is going to be the one for adding a node. So it will take in self as well as the async session object or the async session instance. So I'll just come right here and provide it just like you have it right here. So I'll come and provide it right here, and then we shall have the same thing occurring in that same method. So we're just going to come right here and provide our async with statement to create our session. Then inside this session, we are also going to provide another attribute to this specific add function, which is basically going to be the node to basically go ahead and store within our database. Now I want to keep this to the type of node, and this will be enough for us to basically store it within our database. So to actually keep this within our database, what we shall have to do is to use our async session. So in this case, we shall just come and say session dot add, and in this case, we shall add our node, and then we shall basically go ahead and await session dot commit, and that will be enough for us to go ahead and add that specific object to our database. Now we're going to do the same thing for retrieving an item or retrieving a node item. So let me decrease my font a little bit. So what I'm going to do is to copy what we have here and then modify it for the other operations. I'll come right here, provide this here. I'll also go ahead and provide this here. So this is going to be for retrieving the item by ID. This is going to be for updating the item by ID. And now we are also going to go ahead and provide this as the one for deleting. So let's go ahead and modify this. So in here, what I'm going to do is to first modify the one for retrieving an item by its ID. So this is for adding. So here I'll just come right here and say this is going to be for get by ID. So this will basically take in self, async session, and then the specific node ID. So this node ID will be the string, which is going to be the unique identifier for that string. So once we have the session here, we are simply going to come right here, and what we shall do is to come and say that we shall have a statement for querying for that specific item. So we're going to say select, and in this case we shall be selecting for a node, but we want to use the filter. So you can basically filter by, and in this case we can basically filter for a certain criterion where the clause actually exists. So let's actually just keep it to filter. So in here, what I'm going to do is to filter by the node ID if the node ID is equal to what we may have as our node ID. So I'll just come right here and say where we have the node ID. So what happens is we're going to provide our session object as well as our node ID for us to be able to query out this select statement. And once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to execute this statement. So we're going to come and say that our result is going to be equal to await. In this case, we shall say session dot execute. So what we shall have is our statement in here. And once that is done, then we shall need to return our result. So we shall say result dot, in this case, we shall basically return our result as result dot scalars. And in this case, we can also return dot one to basically return an item. So shall just return one. So right now what we've done is to select the node by ID and then execute the statement and then return the specific node, just like you see right here. So getting by ID is done. Now let's work on the one for updating and deleting. So this is going to be almost the same. In fact, what I have to do is to come right here and say that we are going to update our node. So what I'll do is to actually come right here, instead of having our async session, we shall basically go, anyway, let's just go ahead and modify this. So it's not going to be adding to the session. What we shall be doing is to basically provide some data for creating the node. And once we have that data, we actually going to have the node data. So let's go ahead and provide the node data. So if you have a node, we're going to have the node ID, which is the ID of that specific node we want to update. Now our node here will actually be equal to a call to our get by. So in this case, we're going to call our get by here. So we shall say self dot get by, and in this case, let's actually define this as get by ID to be more clear. So it's going to be get by ID, and here we're actually going to also modify this to self dot get by ID. Now we shall also have to provide the session as our session ID. So we shall say session, and then we shall also call our node ID. So in here we shall call our node ID. So once we've been able to provide this, then we shall also need to have some data within this method. So we're going to have our data, and this data is going to help us to basically be the one to update this node. So I'll just come right here and say node dot, in this case we shall have our title, and this is going to be equal to the data, and then we shall have our title right here, and then we shall also have our node dot content. These are the only things that we are going to update on this specific node data. So this is going to be our node content. So once this is done, we are now going to go ahead and basically use our session to commit this or to update this in our database. So we shall come right here and say await, and then we shall say session dot commit, and this will be enough to update our item. So we shall now just say return our updated node. So once we've been able to do this, then let's work on our deleting. So deleting is actually simple. Once we have that specific item we want to delete, all we have to do is to provide it. So what we shall do is to go ahead and use our session to delete that specific item. So instead of calling session.add, in this case, shall call session.delete. So it's going to be session.delete. And once we have our session.delete, then we're going to have our instance or our node. So that's actually going to be our node. And then this will be enough to just save it to our database. Now, many times I have people complaining about how my code is not following a particular standard. I do not use PEP 8, but I use Black to go ahead and format my code. So I'm going to top my server and install Black to basically go ahead and organize my code. So I'll say pip install Black. And this will go ahead and install Black. So once Black is installed, I'll pip freeze it to our requirements.txt file. And then we shall go ahead and format our code. So to format my code, I'm simply going to go ahead and run. Let me actually just come right here and run Python, run -m Black, and then I'll run models main, and then I'll also run createdb. I'll run where we just wrote in our crud.py, and this will be enough for me to format my code. So you see, now my code is a little bit more spaced than how it was. So once this is done, then the next thing for us to do is going to be to basically go ahead and use these functions that we've created right here in our API code, so that we'll be able to basically go ahead and create our CRUD API or our simple CRUD API. All right, so now what we're going to do is to first create an instance of our CRUD class that we've created right here. So to do that, I'm going to go to our main.py where we actually created our API endpoints. So what I'm going to do is to come right here and say from CRUD, we are going to basically go, which is actually called CRUD. We are going to go ahead and import our CRUD class. And now we're going to go ahead and basically call, or basically create an instance of that CRUD class. I'll say db is going to be equal to CRUD. Once we've been able to do this, then the next thing is going to be for us to get our notes. So let's start by getting all our notes. To get all our notes, we are going to come right here and basically say notes is going to be equal to CRUD, or actually, which is going to be our db dot, in this case, will be get all, and this will basically take in a session. So we need to create our async session. So we're going to go ahead and import our async session maker class that's going to allow us to create a session object. And using that session object, we shall basically make use of our method so that we do create, read, update, and delete functionality. So what I'll do is to go at the top right here, and I'm going to come right here and say from, so this is going to be from SQLAlchemy.ext.async.io. We are going to go ahead and import our async session maker. And now we need to create this async session. So we're going to come and say that our session is going to be an object of type async session maker. And once we have that, then we are going to go ahead and basically attach this to our engine. So for us to attach this to our engine, we're going to go ahead and import that. So we can come here and say from db import engine, because that's where we actually went ahead and created that variable via engine, which is basically the one that we have here. So if we come right here and say that we're having our instance of our session maker class, we're now going to go ahead and say that bind is going to be equal to engine. And once we've been able to do that, then we're also going to provide one really important argument, which is going to be equal to expire on commit. And this is going to be false, because we do not want to keep on closing our session in case we've committed. What we want to do is to go ahead and still maintain the session and be able to still use that session to create, read, update, and delete, just like you see right here. In case you have a comment about how this works, please leave it down in the comment section below. I'll highly appreciate. So to go ahead, what I'll do is to go right here and say notes is going to be equal to db.getAll, and in here we're going to actually go ahead and provide an async session. So to do this, we are going to go ahead and say the async session is going to be our session. So shall come right here and provide our session, and that will be enough to return our notes. So we're going to come right here and say return notes. So once we've been able to do this, then if we go to our API, hoping that our server is still running, we actually shut it down. So I'll have to run it with uvcon. Actually need to go ahead and basically rerun the command. I'll say uvcon main and then app. So I'll also provide reload, and that will restart our server at localhost 8000. So if we go back to our browser right here and we try to basically go ahead and create or get all our notes, when you try this out, we're basically going to see that we have a small error right here. And I think this error is coming from how we are returning this. So we have one coroutine object is non-iterable. I think we forgot to await something, and that is our db.get all. So we need to await that coroutine. If we await it, we are now going to go ahead and reload our server. If we try to execute this statement again, or execute, it's going to actually return an empty dictionary, just like you see here. But we do not want to return an empty dictionary. All we need to do is to return a list of note items. So let me actually adjust this a little bit so that you guys can see me well. So if we go ahead and modify this, so we are actually going to create a model that's going to allow us to serialize model items and return them as a list of items. So how we're going to do that, we're going to be using Pydantic to help us to create those classes that are going to act as serializers to help us turn our database objects into a format that is going to be returned by the API, and that is JSON. So for us to do that, what I'm going to do is to come right here and create a new file. I'm going to call this schemas.py. You can feel free to call it models or serializers or whatever you want, but I'm going to call it schemas for now. And once I have this, then I'm going to begin by importing the base model class from Pydantic. So I'll come and say from Pydantic, we are going to go ahead and import our base model class. So using this base model class, we're going to go ahead and create our first model. So I'll come right here and say that our class is going to be the not model class, and it's going to inherit from our base model. So what we want right now is to have all the fields that exist on our not database model being returned when we are querying for all the items or all our nodes within our database. So if you go right in here, we can basically go ahead and provide our ID, and we can say that it's going to be a string. Our title will be a string. Our content will be a string. And here we can also have our date created being a date time. So we're going to go ahead and import our date time type. So I'll say from date time. So it's going to be our date time. We are going to go ahead and import our date time. So once we have that, we are now going to come and say that our date created is going to be equal to our date time. So in this case, actually it's going to be mapping onto the date time class. Now, one important thing is we also need to specify that these are going to be working with an ORM. And in this case, the ORM is going to be SQLAlchemy. So for us to do that, we are going to come right here and add one model config attribute. So this is basically going to create a dictionary of attributes that are going to be present on this schema. So for us to define this, we are going to go ahead and import a certain class that was added to Pydantic version 2 to help us be able to define those attributes as just an object of type config dictionary. So what I'll do is to go right here where I imported base model, and then I'll add our config dictionary. So after adding our config dictionary, I'll come right here and say that our model config is going to be equal to a call to our config dictionary. And in here, we're going to have a lot of attributes. But the most important one, since we are using an ORM, is going to be from attributes. And this is going to be a Boolean. So shall provide true to this Boolean, which will basically specify whether we are using an ORM or not. Now think of this as the ORM mode that was present in previous versions of Pydantic. So this is one that's going to help us to specify that we're working with SQLAlchemy. Now, for us to make use of this model, what we're going to do is to head over to our main.py and then import our model. So we're going to come right here and say from schemas, we are going to go ahead and import our not model. So once we've been able to import our not model, I'm going to come right where we have our notes. And then I'll define our response model. And our response model is going to be another argument to this app.get. So in this case, we shall say our response model is going to be a list of notes. So the way we define a list is by using the typing list class. So we shall have to also import that. I'll come and say from typing, we are going to go ahead and import list. And once we have this list, then we're going to come right here and define our response model as a list of our not model objects. So once we've been able to do that, if we go ahead and try to execute this statement, we now see that it's going to return an empty list of items, which is working successfully. So we've been able to basically work on the functionality for getting all our notes. If you want to basically create a note, then what we're going to do is to go ahead and basically call the, so let's actually go ahead and do this. So if we go right here and say not, and this is going to be await, and in this case should be await db.add. So in here we're going to need our session, so shall provide our session as well as our node object. So let's just call this new node, but we haven't yet created the new node, so let's go ahead and create it. So I'm going to sum and say that our new node is going to be equal to a node object. So hoping that we actually imported our node class, so to import it, it's going to be from our models. So I'll come and say from models we are going to go ahead and import our node model. So once we've been able to do this, then we're going to come right here and create a new model. So we shall say this is going to be a node and it's going to have an ID. Now what I'm going to do is to use the UUIDs to create universally unique IDs for each of our node objects. So what I'm going to do is to come and say string, and I'm going to go ahead and import our UUIDs. So the UUID exists within Python, so just going to come and say import UUID. And once I have that, then I'll come right here and say that we are going to have our ID as a UUID dot UUID, and in this case it's going to be a UUID4. And this will create a unique string that's universally unique for each of the nodes that we have. Then the next thing is going to be our title. So to create our title, we're going to need the Pydantic model for basically creating a node. So think of a Pydantic model as a form in which you provide data to send it to the API. But this form is not actually the one that we can see. But what it does is to get this data, validate it, and then be able to send it or return data using it from the API. So what we're going to do is to come right where we have our schemas. We're going to copy this exact schema that we have right here. But what this is going to do is to have only fields that are required when creating a node. And those are the title and the content. So I'm going to come right here and remove the ID. And also I'm going to also remove the date created so that we have only the title and the content. Then here we shall just basically say that it's going to be a node create model, and then this is going to be the one for helping us to create a node. So I'll come to our main.py, and then after importing our node model, I'll also import our node create model. And once we have that, then we're also going to come and provide a parameter to this specific create node request handler function. So what this is going to do is to come and have that specific node. Here we're going to have something like node data, and then this node data is going to be of type node create model. So once we have that, then we are going to go ahead and provide our title. So we're going to say our title is going to be equal to node data, and in this case shall have our node data dot title, which is going to be the title that comes from our imaginary form or our serializer class or our model. So then we shall also have our content. It's going to be our content, and this content is going to be node data dot, in this case we're going to have our content. So once we've been able to do this, then let's go ahead and save this. So we can save it by using this specific method right here, and then we are also going to go ahead and return this specific node. So we can say return node, and once we've been able to do that, then another thing we can do is to also provide the status code for the response when we have created a node. Now for us to do that, what we're going to do is to come right here, and what I'll do is to say that our status code is going to be equal to the 201 status code, or the created status code. But to make this more interesting, what you can do is to actually use the HTTP status class that comes pre-built within Python to help us have all these kept in one place. So what I'll do is to come and import it. So I'll say from HTTP, we are going to import our HTTP status, and we are going to go ahead and import that. So shall say that shall have our HTTP status dot, and in this case shall have the created status code being returned in that case. So if we try, what you're going to do is to go where we create a note and you refresh. We're now going to see that this is going to even have an example schema. If you want to customize this schema for it to have some information that we can easily understand, or that can have a clue that can make the documentation easy, then we shall have to update our config dictionary. So I'll head over to schemas, and then within our note create model, I'm going to also provide one other argument, which is going to be the JSON schema extra. So this will be a simple dictionary with a key of example. And then in here, we shall also have a dictionary, and this will actually also have a key to basically, this will be a key to basically the example that we want to provide of the fields that they may provide while filling in that specific or providing note. So in this case, that will be the title, and then we can also provide a sample. So here we can actually say sample title, and then we can also provide the sample content. So this is going to be the content, and then here we can basically go ahead and create our sample content. So we can come and say that we shall have our sample content. Let's go back here. So let me close what I have here. So if I go right here and provide our sample content, this is going to be our sample content. And once I've been able to provide that, when you go back to our UI right here and refresh, we shall basically see that this is going to now return that simple description that we provided right there. So let's go ahead and make use of this specific endpoint. So when you go ahead and try it out, what I'll do is to come right here and execute with our sample data. And now we see that it's going to return null. I wonder why. Let's go ahead and try to actually see what is being done here. So we see that async session.delete was never awaited, and okay, let's go ahead and try to fix that. So if we go to our schemas, actually within our CRUD, all you have to do is to first await something. So this is actually going to be await session.delete, and then I think session.delete. So if we head back here and we try to execute this, still have an internal server error, which is telling us that note is not persisted. So I wonder why this invalid request error, note is not persisted. So let's go ahead and see. If we head over to our CRUD.py, where we actually add a note, I think we need to create data. I think what we need is the data for that specific note, not the specific note, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just actually go ahead and see why this is not working. I think what we need to do is to save that note, but then they are telling us that the note is not persisted. Let's see, instance note is not persisted. I actually created a mistake within our add function. So I defined add, and then I also called delete add, so it wasn't able to see it. So I think I need to just fix this by changing the name here. So it's going to be making use of our add function right here. So if we go within our main.py, we try to create our model again. So when we try to basically create our note once again, I'm going to execute the query. We can now see that it's returning now, but let's see what it's actually printing right here. So is it even inserting? So we're seeing that it's inserting the values, but if we go right where we actually query for the items, let's first clear this, and then we try to get all notes. If we try this out and execute, we now see that it's returning that note, but it's returning now, and I don't know why this is being returned. So let's go ahead and see what it's returning. So if we go back to our CRUD.py and try to see what it's returning. So we did not return anything here. That's why it's not returning anything. So if we try to basically go ahead and return something, so let's say this is going to return our not. So in here, let's go ahead and actually see if this works. So we shall test this API endpoint again. So we shall say create not, and in this case, let's provide something else. Let's say 3 ways to read .env files, and here I'll add a note. So let's say these are 3 ways, and if we go ahead and run this, actually interchange this. This is supposed to be the type. This is supposed to, anyway, this is going to be the content. Let me just put it here, and then I also provide the title right here. So if I provide this, if I go ahead and basically execute this, now we see that it's actually working. So it wasn't actually returning anything. Now it's returning the data, and that's why we see that it's actually working successfully. If we go ahead and try to access our get all notes, if we execute, you see that now 2 items have been added to our database, which is working fine. So if we go ahead and clear this, now we can go ahead and try to retrieve an item by its ID. So if we go right here and try to retrieve an item by ID, so what I'm going to do is to head over to our main.py, and in this case what we shall do is to come right here and basically say that our node is going to be equal to await. This will be await db.get by ID, and then we shall provide our node ID. So once we've been able to do that, we are going to go ahead and simply return that specific node that we have queried, or that we are trying to retrieve by its ID. So let's try to do this. So if we go to our API right here, when you get all nodes, let's actually go ahead and get all nodes so that we pick one ID. So I'm going to copy one ID of one specific object, and once I have that, then I'm going to go to get that specific object. So I'll try it out. I'll provide my ID right here. If I execute, I'm going to get an error. I don't know why this is happening, but we're missing one one required positional argument, which is basically the ID of the node. So let's go ahead and provide that. So if we come here, we provided a node ID. I think we forgot the session. And that's what they need. So I come right here and provide our session, and then our node ID. So if you go ahead and try to execute this once again, you now see that it's actually returning that specific. It's returning that specific node with that specific ID, which is beautiful. So if you go ahead and try to update in node, so I'll come right here and I'll basically say that our node is going to be equal to db dot, in this case we shall say update, and in this case we shall need our session as well as our node ID. So we're going to get the node ID that we provide within our request handler right here. So we shall also need data. Actually, it also takes in the data. So we're going to need to update this. So I'm going to make use of the node create model that we created right here. So if we go ahead and basically provide our node ID, so this node ID is going to be a string, and we shall also provide our data, and our data here is going to be our node create model. So if we come right here, we can basically provide our data, and this is going to be our data, the data that comes from this request handler function. If we try to return this, so let's actually try to return this. So I'll just say return our node. So let's see how this is going to work. So if we say return node and head over to our SwaggerUi right here, when we refresh, we're going to expect that this is going to require us to provide the argument of the node ID as well as provide a request body. Now let me try to copy an ID and then try to basically update. So you note this is sample title and sample content. If I try to update this with new content, let me try to close this, head over to where we update the note. I'll try it out, provide our note ID. So I'm going to change this to updated sample content. And I'm also going to change this to updated sample title. So if we go ahead and execute this, we're now going to see that we have an error. Let's see what this error is about. So right now we see that the coroutine is not iterable. I think we forgot to await. So I'll go ahead and await this. So if we go right here and try to execute, now going to see that we still have an error. So the async session object is not callable. So let's see where this is coming from. I think it's coming from where we are defining the update function. If we head over to our crud.py and go to update, so we are seeing with async session, then get ID by that. So I think it's coming from where we actually get the ID. So I think I did a mistake here. I don't know if we are supposed to execute that statement or something like that, but let's actually try to just do exactly that. So what I'm going to do is to basically call that specific function. So let me actually call our node right here with our session, or let me actually just query for that specific node for us to be able to update that specific node without having to use the same function that we did here. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and query for this. So I think we have that code already, which is the one for basically getting a node by its ID. So these are the statements right here. So if we go ahead and copy what we have here, we are basically going to come and have it right here. So in this case, our node will be equal to what we get as the result here, and then we shall go ahead and update it. So it's basically what we have as a result of querying for a node by its ID, executing the statement, and then we go ahead and return that specific node and then update it and basically commit our session. So if we go ahead and try to execute this again, we now see that we still have an error. This error in this case is saying that not create model object is not subscriptable. I think that is going to be, let's go to our main.py and see where this is happening. So our node is going to actually be a dictionary, not a model object. So that's why I actually provided that. So sorry for that. So if I say the add data is going to be a dictionary, then this dictionary is going to be one with a title that is going to be our data. Or what we can actually do is to provide this as, we can actually use the not create dictionary, but we provide our data as a dictionary that has its attributes coming from the not create model. So in this case, we can have the title being equal to the data dot. In this case, we shall have our title, and what we can have is the content, and this content can also be data dot content. So if we go ahead and try to update this, so we can execute this, and then we see that it's actually basically updating the content. So let's see, or let's verify if this has actually been updated. So if we go to get all nodes and we try, or let's actually get that specific node by its ID. If we grab this ID and head over to where we get the node by its ID, if we try it out, we shall provide the ID and we execute. We now see that it's the updated sample content and the updated sample title, which is actually working successfully. So I'm going to clear this for now. And now let's go ahead and try to delete that specific item. So for us to delete an item, what we're going to do is to first get that note and then delete it. So when you go to our CRUD, when we observe, we actually have to have the session as well as the note that we want to delete. So for us to be able to delete our note, what we're going to do is to come right here and first get our note. So we are going to come right here and say that our note is going to be equal to await db.get by id, and we shall have to provide our session right here, and then we shall also have to provide our note id, which is going to be the specific note id that we have right here. So if we go ahead and also delete this note, we can basically just come right here and say result, and actually have a result right here, and this result is going to be equal to, so deep inside here in our code, we actually not returning anything, but let's just return a dictionary in case our note has been created or deleted. Actually, in this case, it's deleted. I'm a bit tired. So what you're going to say is this is going to be await db.delete, and in this case, we are going to get our session as well as our note. So in this case, our note will be our note that we've queried for right here. So if we go ahead and return our result, we now expect that this is going to basically return our result. We also want to return a status code of 204 no content in case we have successfully deleted our note. So we shall come right here and say that our status code is going to be http status dot, and in this case we are going to provide our note. Actually, it's going to be no content. So I'll basically say no content just to indicate that our note has been deleted. So let me first actually go ahead and format the code that we have in here. So I'll say python -m black, and then I'll basically point to where we have our main.py. So that will go ahead and format our code to look a little bit organized, just like you see it right here. So if we go ahead and try to delete that note with a specific ID, so I'll try it out, I'll provide the ID. If we go ahead and execute, we now see that it's going to return 204 no content, which is beautiful. Let's verify if that note has been deleted. So if we go right here and execute, we're going to see that we only have in one note item. So that actually means that our item is successfully deleted from our database. I hope you've had fun coding along with this video. In this video, what we've done is to basically get to explore SQLAlchemy 2.0, Pydantic. We've dealt with FastAPI, and we've also learned how to work with PostgreSQL using SQLAlchemy. If you've liked this video, please leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new. I'd really appreciate if you left a like on this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.